I still remember the moment I realized I had been invisible to the person I loved most. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the sun spills gold through the living room windows, dust motes floating lazily in the light. Sophia was sitting across from me, her eyes scanning the room with a polite smile. But her words cut deeper than any blade I could imagine. "You know, Logan," she said softly, almost teasingly, "your family, they're just useless." I froze. The words echoed in the space between us. The quiet hum of the city outside, the soft ticking of the clock, the faint rustle of the curtains, all of it seemed to stop. I wanted to laugh, to ask if she was joking, but I couldn't. My chest tightened and my hands felt heavy in my lap. I had loved her. Truly, deeply. I thought we were building a life together, dreaming about a future filled with warmth, laughter, and small joys. But in that instant, I realized the foundation of our love was slipping through my fingers, leaving only cold, sharp truth. Sophia didn't see my heart. She didn't see the warmth my family had given me, the sacrifices, the laughter, the love that had shaped me. All she saw was status, wealth, and her own reflection in the mirror of privilege she cherished so dearly. I couldn't speak. I could only sit there feeling the weight of betrayal settle like a stone in my chest. The room seemed smaller suddenly, and the walls closed in with judgment I couldn't escape. And then, almost whispering to herself, Sophia added, "I just don't understand why anyone would live like this, when there's so much more out there." Her words weren't just cruel, they were a dismissal of everything I had ever loved, everything that had made me who I was. And yet, in that silence, a seed of clarity began to grow in me. If she valued wealth over love, if she judged people by the size of their homes or the contents of their wallets, then perhaps the world I knew, the one built on heart and integrity, was more valuable than she could ever understand. Little did I know, the moment she underestimated my life, the universe was quietly preparing its lesson. My name is Logan, and I come from a family that most people would call ordinary. We don't own yachts, or private jets, or gold-plated cars. We live in a modest home, in a neighborhood where everyone knows each other's names. But what we lack in wealth, we make up for in love. Every corner of our house has memories. My mother's warm laughter echoing through the kitchen. My father's quiet advice over a cup of tea. My little sister's mischievous giggles in the hallway. It's a world built on kindness, trust, and heart. Sophia, my fiancée, came from a completely different world. She was intelligent, charming, and graceful. No doubt about it. But she was also a woman raised in luxury, surrounded by opulence. Taught that status and money were the ultimate measure of a person. When we first met, I was enchanted by her smile, the sparkle in her eyes, the way she made me feel like I mattered. I didn't see the walls she had built around her values, and she didn't seem to notice mine. Our courtship was a blend of opposites. I would show her the quiet beauty of a park at sunrise, the way my father could fix anything with just his hands, the warmth of a home-cooked meal on a rainy day. She would show me designer stores, lavish restaurants, and weekends in cities where the buildings seemed to touch the clouds. At first, it felt exciting, a bridge between two worlds. But slowly, the differences that once seemed charming began to feel like cracks in a fragile glass vase. I remember the night we announced our engagement to my family. My parents were overjoyed. My father hugged me longer than usual. I can see it in your eyes. My mother's hands trembled as she adjusted Sophia's hair, and my little sister could barely contain her excitement. We were laughing, taking pictures, savoring the moment. But Sophia, she was different. Her smile never reached her eyes. She looked around our small living room as if inspecting it for flaws. The couch was to warn the curtains too faded, the photos on the wall. "Quaint," she muttered almost under her breath. I brushed it off at first, telling myself it was just nerves. I wanted to believe she loved me, not my circumstances. And yet, the words she eventually spoke that evening pierced through all the warmth. She called my family useless. She mocked our modest home. She laughed at the very foundation of my life, the people who had made me who I am. I tried to explain, tried to tell her that wealth is not measured in gold or silk, that love and loyalty are the true treasures of a family. But her eyes never softened. Her tone never changed. I felt a strange mix of shame and disbelief. Shame, because I had invited her into our lives without truly knowing her values. Disbelief, because I couldn't fathom that someone I loved so deeply could be so blind to what mattered most. In that moment, I understood that Sophia saw my world as a stepping stone, a temporary pause before something grander, shinier, more luxurious. I began to notice the subtle patterns after that. She would make comments about my clothes, my old car, the way we dined. She would compare, without asking, without understanding, and I found myself shrinking, holding back pieces of my life so they wouldn't offend her delicate sensibilities. The more I gave, the more I felt invisible. But beneath it all, I kept a quiet hope that love could bridge this gap, that she would see my family, my home, my heart, and understand that the true value of life wasn't in wealth, but in connection. I wanted to believe that, despite the harshness of her words, there was still a spark of understanding deep inside her. Little did I know, the test of that hope would come sooner than I expected, and it would reveal truths I never could have imagined. The days that followed, Sophia's cruel words felt heavier than any I had ever known. I tried to push past the sting to focus on our engagement, to remind myself of the moments when she had smiled at me in a way that made me feel special. But the tension in our relationship was impossible to ignore. Every laugh felt forced, every conversation carried an undercurrent of judgment, and every glance from her seemed to measure me against some invisible standard I could never reach. I remember one evening in particular. We had gone out for dinner at a quiet little restaurant in the city. I had chosen it because it was where my parents had celebrated their anniversary years ago, a place with soft lighting, warm wood paneling, and familiar comfort. Sophia, however, barely touched her food. She leaned back in her chair, scanning the room as if she had stumbled into something beneath her. "This place is charming," she said, tilting her head, "but don't you think it's a bit humble?" I felt a pang in my chest. Humble. My world was humble. But humble didn't mean worthless. It meant grounded, meaningful, real. I swallowed my frustration, forcing a calm smile. "Maybe," I replied softly, "but sometimes humble is the kind of place where memories stick, where warmth lasts longer than gold." She gave a polite nod, her lips curving into a small, polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I could feel the distance growing, like a shadow stretching slowly across our lives. At home, things weren't better. Sophia rarely engaged with my family now. She would sit through dinners, barely speaking, her eyes constantly checking her phone. My father, a man of quiet dignity and patience, tried to be polite to make conversation, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. My mother, ever warm and nurturing, would offer her favorite dishes, hoping to coax some softness out of Sophia, only to have her plate left nearly untouched. I tried talking to Sophia about it, hoping to bridge the growing gap. "Do you even like being here?" I asked one evening, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I might see something vulnerable behind her carefully curated expression, but it vanished instantly. "I like you," she said flatly, "but this life, it's not for me. I just don't understand why anyone would settle for less." Her words hit me harder than the first time. She wasn't just dissatisfied, she was dismissive. And in that dismissal, I began to see the truth. She didn't love me. Not truly, not beyond what I could provide or represent. As weeks turned into months, the tension became unbearable. Small disagreements turned into silent dinners. Polite conversations became rehearsed statements. I felt trapped in a world where my love, my family, and my life were constantly measured against her expectations. One afternoon, Sophia suggested a visit to a friend's lavish apartment. She had been dropping hints about a lifestyle I couldn't provide, and I agreed, thinking maybe she just wanted me to see the world she cherished. But when we arrived, I realized this wasn't about sharing experiences. It was about comparison, judgment, and subtle humiliation. Her friends laughed at stories of my childhood, my family, even my modest upbringing. I could feel the sting of their polite mockery, and Sophia smiled, her laughter ringing like a bell light, elegant but cruel in its precision. I wanted to disappear, to shield my heart from this constant eroding of my dignity. I went home that night, exhausted and disheartened. My parents noticed immediately. My father, Mr. Aiden, or rather the man I had always admired from a distance because I didn't know yet how carefully he observed every detail, sat me down. "Logan," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you need to remember who you are. You are not defined by her opinions. You are defined by your character, by your heart, by the people who love you for you." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. But even his words, soothing as they were, couldn't erase the tension that Sophia had sown. The breaking point came subtly, almost imperceptibly. Sophia began to question every choice I made, every habit I had grown up with, every loyalty I held. "Why do you even still live here?" she asked one evening, her gaze sweeping the walls of my family home. "Don't you want something better?" I realized then that she wasn't just unhappy, she was incompatible with the life I loved. She valued prestige over authenticity, appearances over substance. My world, filled with laughter, warmth, and simple joys, meant nothing to her. I wanted to confront her, to tell her that love isn't measured in wealth, that family isn't useless just because they don't own mansions or yachts. But I held my tongue. I could see now that confrontation wouldn't change her heart, would only escalate her judgment. Instead, I started observing, quietly, carefully, noticing the ways she revealed her true self. Pride, entitlement, a coldness I hadn't noticed before. And then came the invitation that would change everything. One afternoon, Mr. Aiden, my father, a man I had always admired, though never fully understood, his depth called me. His voice was calm, even gentle, but there was an unmistakable firmness in it. "Logan," he said, "I think it's time Sophia visits our real home, the one she hasn't seen." I blinked, confused, hesitant. "You mean you want her to see our actual family?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "It's important for her to understand where you come from. If she can't see the value in it, then perhaps it's a lesson she needs to learn herself." At first, I was nervous, afraid of conflict, afraid of Sophia's reaction. But as the days passed, I realized something crucial. This wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about revealing truth. The truth of who we were, the truth of what mattered most, and the truth that love cannot be forced nor purchased. Little did I know, that visit would change everything. The day Sophia was to visit our real home, I woke early, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. I knew this wasn't just a casual visit. My father, Mr. Aiden, never acted without intention. There was a quiet authority in him that commanded attention, not through loudness or anger or wealth, but through the weight of presence. People clearly understood their motives, and, when necessary, orchestrated events so truth could reveal itself. Sophia arrived in her sleek black car, dressed in the kind of outfit that sparkled under sunlight, effortlessly stylish and precise. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the driveway, and smiled at me, though it was the kind of smile that belonged more to a photograph than to a living moment. I noticed immediately how she glanced at our modest home, scanning it with the same scrutiny she had always shown, and my stomach tightened. Inside, the house smelled of warmth, cinnamon from my mother's freshly baked bread, the soft scent of polished wood, the faint perfume of my little sister's lavender soap. It was home in every sense of the word, and yet I could see Sophia's eyes narrow slightly, her posture stiffen. "Interesting," she murmured, almost to herself. I guided her to the living room, where my father waited. Mr. Aiden's presence filled the space, calm and unyielding. He looked at Sophia, studied her carefully, and then, in that serene but commanding tone, said, "Welcome, Sophia. I hope you'll enjoy your visit." She smiled politely, nodding, but I could sense her discomfort immediately. Something about my father seemed to unsettle her, not because he was loud or intimidating, but because he didn't bend, didn't perform, didn't need her approval. As the afternoon unfolded, the truth slowly began to emerge, not through confrontation, not through arguments, but through quiet, deliberate revelation. My father invited Sophia into the kitchen first, where my mother was preparing tea and snacks. The conversation was light at first, about simple things, recipes, daily routines, family stories. But then Mr. Aiden subtly began to reveal glimpses of the life we led, our values, our principles, the subtle power of a family built on trust rather than wealth. "You see, Sophia," he said, pouring tea with a measured hand, "wealth can buy comfort, but it cannot buy loyalty. It cannot buy respect. It cannot create memories that last generations." Sophia smiled politely, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She tried to respond, to brush it off, but every word she spoke felt measured, artificial, as if she were aware she was being observed, because she was. Later, Mr. Aiden led her to the study. On the shelves were awards, not for wealth, but for philanthropy, for community service, for projects that had changed lives quietly and profoundly. "These are the treasures we value," he said softly. "Not the ones that shine and glitter, but the ones that matter in the heart." Sophia's polite smile faltered. Her hands, previously poised with elegance, now fidgeted slightly. I watched silently, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction, though I reminded myself it wasn't revenge, it was revelation. The final part of the visit was a quiet walk through our neighborhood. Children played in the streets. Neighbors waved and greeted my family warmly. The scene was simple, ordinary, and yet it radiated something Sophia had never truly encountered: genuine connection. She tried to comment on how small the homes were, how ordinary the surroundings looked, but her words lacked conviction. I could see a storm of thoughts behind her eyes, the realization that these people, this environment, this life, held something she had never valued before: authenticity, love, respect, and warmth. At one point, my father paused, looking directly at her. "Sophia, you spoke once about my family being useless," he said softly, without anger. "Yet here you see a home filled with people who give, who care, who sacrifice without needing recognition. Can you tell me now which life holds true value?" Sophia's face went pale. She opened her mouth, and for a moment I thought she would defend herself. But no words came. She looked around, seeing my parents' warmth, my sister's joy, the subtle dignity my father carried in every gesture, and something inside her shifted. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her, a crack in the carefully constructed armor of entitlement she had always worn. It wasn't humility yet, not fully, but it was recognition, quiet, unspoken, undeniable. We returned to the living room, and she sat silently, her hands folded in her lap. My father didn't pressure her, didn't speak harshly. He simply observed, allowing her to confront the truth herself. I sat beside her, feeling the tension drain slowly, replaced by a strange calm. "Finally," she whispered, almost to herself, I didn't realize," I thought. Her voice faltered. She struggled to find words, to reconcile what she had believed with what she had witnessed. I realized then that no matter what she said next, the lesson had already taken root. My father's quiet authority, the genuine love of my family, the dignity that came not from wealth but from heart-eat, was undeniable. I didn't speak. I let her sit with it. There was no gloating, no anger, no immediate judgment. The power wasn't in words. It was in silence, in presence, in the truth that cannot be denied. And in that silence, I felt a strange liberation. For months, I had carried the weight of her judgment, the sting of her words, the tension of her disdain. Now, all of it began to dissolve. Not because she had apologized, she hadn't, but because the truth was self-evident. Sophia looked at me then, her eyes softer, uncertain, almost ashamed. But it didn't matter. The lesson had been delivered, quietly, elegantly, and without force. The bridge, she had refused to cross the bridge between superficial desire and genuine life, had been shown to her, and she could choose to walk it or turn away. After Sophia left our home that day, I felt a quiet relief I hadn't realized I needed. The tension that had gripped my chest for months, the sting of her judgment, the constant measuring of my worth against money and status began to ease. I walked through the house slowly, touching the familiar corners, listening to the soft hum of life around me. My mother was in the kitchen, her hands busy with a pot of soup, her face lighting up when she saw me. "How did it go?" she asked gently. I smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and serenity. She saw more than she realized," I said softly. "Not everything, not fully, but enough." My father, Mr. Aiden, leaned against the doorway, watching me with that calm, unwavering gaze. "Remember, Logan," he said, "truth has a way of revealing itself, often when people least expect it. You cannot force understanding, but you can allow it to happen naturally." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride, not in confrontation. Not in proving someone wrong, but in knowing that the life we led, the values we cherished, were undeniable. They didn't need validation from someone who only valued wealth. In the days that followed, Sophia's demeanor began to change, though subtly. She no longer dismissed my family outright. She tried to engage, though awkwardly, in polite conversation with my mother and sister. There was hesitation in her smile, a tentative softness in her voice that hadn't existed before. I noticed it, of course, but I also realized that Chengif, it were real would, need time. And more importantly, I understood that my feelings were no longer tied to her approval. I had spent months bending, shrinking, trying to meet someone else's impossible standards. Now, I felt free. One evening, Sophia attempted to apologize. I didn't understand before," she said quietly, looking at me with eyes that searched for forgiveness. I judged too quickly. I studied her, taking in the hesitation, the sincerity, and perhaps a lingering pride she hadn't yet let go of. I spoke softly, almost whispering, "I understand, Sophia, but it's not about forgiveness. It's about realizing what really matters. My family, my life, they're real. They have depth. They have love. And that's something no amount of money can replace." She nodded, and for a moment I saw the weight lift from her shoulders. But I didn't reach for her hand. I let the silence speak for itself. The lesson had been delivered quietly, without drama, and the power of truth lingered in the space between us. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a subtle shift in Sophia. She became more reserved, more contemplative, as if she were weighing the value of what she had dismissed so easily before. But I no longer felt the need to watch her closely, to anticipate her reactions. I realized that true power doesn't lie in confrontation or revenge, it lies in living authentically, in standing quietly in your own truth while letting the world reveal itself naturally. My family's warmth never wavered. My parents continued to offer love and guidance. My sister's laughter filled the house, pure and unjudged. And I, for the first time in months, felt a calm certainty about who I was, where I came from, and what I valued most. Sophia's lesson had been revealed not through force, but through quiet presence, through the undeniable dignity of a life lived with heart. And in that, there was no triumph over her, only clarity for both of us. I often reflect on that day, on the way my father guided her without raising his voice, without judgment, and yet allowed the truth to land fully in her mind. It's a lesson I carry with me now. Wealth can impress, but it cannot teach love. Status can dazzle, but it cannot replace integrity. And people may try to measure others by the size of their homes, the brand of their clothes, or the richness of their bank accounts, but true worth is invisible. Sophia may never fully understand the depth of what she dismissed, and perhaps that is for the best, because life teaches lessons in its own time, and sometimes the most profound truths are discovered quietly, without applause or recognition. I realized something else. I don't need her approval, or anyone else's, to validate my life. I don't need grand gestures or lavish displays. My family, my home, my love, they are proof enough that life's richest treasures are not material. And in that understanding, I felt a calm joy, a quiet, unwavering certainty that comes only from knowing your own worth and living authentically without compromise. Weeks later, when I walked through our home alone, listening to the familiar rhythms of life, my mother humming in the kitchen, my sister practicing her piano, my father reading quietly in his study, I felt a profound sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from victory over someone else. It was the kind of peace that comes from truth, integrity, and love. Sophia remained in our lives, but her role had shifted. There was no longer the tension of judgment, no longer the sting of entitlement. Whether she would truly embrace our world remained uncertain, but it no longer affected me. I had learned that the worth of life isn't in who notices it or applauds it is in living it fully, honestly, and with heart. And that, I realized, was the ultimate quiet power. Sitting alone that evening, the golden light of sunset spilling through the window, I felt a quiet gratitude, not for wealth, not for status, not for recognition, but for clarity. For understanding the true measure of life. My family, with their laughter, warmth, and unwavering love, had shown me that the heart holds treasures no money can buy. I thought about Sophia. She had glimpsed that world, that life, and perhaps for the first time, truly understood it, Evan, if only partially. And I realized something important. Some lessons cannot be taught, only witnessed. And sometimes, witnessing is more powerful than words or arguments ever could be. My father, Mr. Aiden, had not raised his voice. He had not demanded respect. He had simply allowed truth to reveal itself naturally, elegantly, and with quiet authority. And in doing so, he had shown me what real strength looks like: patience, dignity, and faith in the power of authenticity. I understood then that the world often tries to measure us by superficial standards, wealth, status, appearances, but these are fleeting, empty markers. True worth is found in the bonds we nurture, the kindness we give, the integrity we maintain when no one is watching. And those lessons, once realized, provide a peace and confidence no judgment, insult, or material measure could ever shake. As I watched the light fade from the sky, casting long, gentle shadows across the room, I felt a quiet smile form on my lips. Life had tested me, yes, but not to punish. It had tested me to reveal what truly matters, and to show that the strength of heart and family cannot be measured by gold, luxury, or fleeting opinions. Sophia may continue her path, guided by her desires and her values. And I may continue mine, grounded in love, patience, and integrity. Our worlds may intersect or drift. Apart, it no longer matters. What matters is that I know where my heart belongs, and that my family's love remains unwavering, a compass guiding me through any storm. In the end, I realized a quiet truth. Life's most precious treasures are invisible. They are not the flashy cars, the designer clothes, or the grand homes. They are the smiles, the embraces, the laughter, the small gestures that carry meaning far beyond what money can ever buy. And in that understanding, I found peace, a calm, unshakable serenity, a gentle joy that comes from living truthfully, loving deeply, and valuing what is eternal over what is fleeting. Because, in the end, wealth can't measure the worth of Louvond. No judgment, no arrogance, no fleeting desire can ever take that away.